Hi, I'm Jeremy with MS Videos, and we're down here at American Gun Works talking with Jeff, the owner, and Mr. Mark Romano. You
How are y'all
probably
doing?
know Mark from a couple of places, but I'll let him introduce himself.
Well, hi. Many of you will know me as Fredrick Jackson Turner, Cowboy Action and Wild Bunch Shooter, currently world champion. And this is Sleepy Joe over here, and on my left, your right, that's politically speaking, Jeremy, but as we call him in the cowboy world, hesitation kills.
Hey. I'm going to say, if I'm brand new to cowboy guns, in 5 minutes, sell me on it.
Okay, if you're brand new to cowboy guns, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Number one, are you an historical reenactor? Are you interested in collecting? Are you interested in authentic calibers? Or are you interested in cowboy action shooting? Because the answer that you get will be based on what your needs or intentions are. Right now, we're going to start with, if you're just a collector, you're going to want to get something like one of these beautiful firearms. In a Beardy Cattleman. I'm going to verify the gun is clear here. What you have here is a beautiful reproduction of a period 1873 Colt, authentic all the way down to the firing pin fixed on the hammer. These are great firearms. They look real. They feel real. They're made out of better steel. And the build value, the build quality is actually better than some cases than the original Colts were. It's a great gun. Is it the best gun in the world for cowboy action shooting? Maybe not. If you're interested in cowboy action shooting, any of these will do fine. But if you wish to really pursue it, you're going to want something that you can beat up, something that you can use, something that you can fire 1,000,000 times and not have to worry about it breaking. We're verifying that this gun is clear. And I can't help but notice an interesting thing. I picked up a Ruger Vaquero. This is their flagship cowboy gun. You'll notice when I started with this firearm, the first thing I do is flip open the loading gate and bring it back to that first notch. That enables me to check the cylinders to make sure they're empty and then accordingly load them. But if you're interested in cowboy action shooting, you're going to want to use the flagship gun of the Ruger line, which is the Ruger Vaquero. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the originals were made using a dated technology. They used ordinary leaf springs for most of the work inside these guns. Coil spring technology was not advanced sufficiently at that point in time, so you got leaf springs. Anybody that's ever used a leaf spring knows if you take a tin can and you bend it enough times, sooner or later that steel will fatigue, it will break, and you'll have a failure to fire. So what Ruger did was, Ruger came along back in the 1950s, 1960s, and they redesigned the gun using coil springs wherever possible. Now, coil spring technology is great because you can use it as much as you want. You're never going to wear a coil spring out. Literally, you'd have to fire this 1,000,000 times, and then you just replace the spring. So these things are great. You'll notice another difference. When I wanted to load this gun, I opened the loading gate, cocked the hammer back to that first notch. If you don't do that, the cylinder is frozen in place. So there's that extra step that you have to go to.
Now, is that a safety feature?
That's actually a design feature of the firearm.
Jeff, do you like that feature or do you take it out?
My personal preference, I like the half cock, but there are extreme advantages to the Ruger design for competition.
It's simplicity itself. Watch, open the gate,
Turn the
rotate
cylinder.
the cylinder. And because you have a little bit of flex on which way it goes, it's easier to get the cartridges in and out. Loading one of these things, the drawback, the reason this is one of the first entries, I'm fascinated, I'm an engineer, and so I'm fascinated with developmental arcs. When this firearm was made, the comparison was to single-shot weapons that loaded from the front. So this was a major step up. After people tried to load this thing a couple of times in high-stress circumstances where you're putting one in, putting another one in. Now imagine the bad guys are coming at you, whooping and hollering and shooting bows in there, and you're putting one in, you're pushing one out, you're putting one in. That's a little bit time-consuming. So this is part of a developmental arc. The next generation is going to have a button where the entire cylinder pops out. You can unload all of them simultaneously. So anything we can do here to make this a little faster and a little bit easier, we're going to do. And so Ruger designed this into their design. So you just flip open the gate and you can access all the cylinders. But Ruger did another really, really interesting thing. Now, again, this is an early design and we're going to learn from the experience. You'll notice the fixed firing pin on the front of the hammer.
Yeah.
In the Old West, the old 6-shooter was actually usually a 5-shooter. And here's why. That fixed firing pin, when you put that hammer forward, is leaning directly on the primer of a cartridge. and it doesn't take a lot of imagination or a lot of effort.
Bump.
You bump this thing, that firearm might go off. And so if you've got it down along your pant leg or along the front, which is where you often wore it, because if you're sitting in a saddle, that's the only way you can access it easily. A modern parallel would be, how do you get to a holstered firearm in the front seat of an automobile?
Right.
As an example. Anyway, so
With a seatbelt on.
with the seatbelt on. That is not considered to be safe. So it didn't take cowboys or people of that period long to figure out this ain't a great idea. So what they would do is they would load 5 and then leave that firing pin down on an empty cylinder. And unless you knew you were walking towards a gunfight, you'd leave that cylinder empty. You might roll up some smokes, or you might roll up a $20 bill or something like that. But
$20
you'd leave
in that day and age?
that cylinder empty. Well, you wouldn't put a gold piece in there unless you were shooting one of the really big calibers. Anyway, what Ruger did was Ruger went through and they redesigned this thing. You'll notice there is no firing pin on the front of the hammer. Instead, what we have here is this step cut into the hammer and what we call a transfer bar. Now, on this firearm, the firing pin is actually trapped inside the frame, and it's spring-loaded to keep constant tension against it, to keep it away from that cartridge and its little tiny, not the percussion cap in this case, in this particular case, the primer. So there's no way on earth that this hammer is going to actually hit that primer unless you pull the trigger. That's what the steps are. There's a thing called a transfer bar in here. If you have the hammer down, the hammer is going to rest solidly against the frame on that top step. When I pull the trigger, the transfer bar stays up. So the second step hits the transfer bar. The transfer bar does, as the name would imply, it drives that firing pin forward and then the gun fires. If I don't have that trigger depressed, when I ease that hammer forward, that transfer bar is going to drop down. So once again, the hammer is going to strike the first step on the frame.
Doesn't make
You could
contact.
beat on this thing with a ball-peen hammer. It will not fire that 6th cartridge. So this firearm is perfectly safe to carry with 6 cartridges in it. That's an absolute advancement. So if you're going to be doing some kind of social work, having that 6th cartridge might be really, really handy. However, in cowboy action shooting, out of respect for the Old West and the fact that some original firearms are actually still in play by some participants in the sport, we still only load 5 in each hand. Now, when the firearm was originally introduced and the U.S. military bought it, it had this incredibly long barrel. And the reason was, remember the engineer and the developmental arc, which I'm fascinated. The propellant at that point in time was black powder. Now, black powder is a remarkably inefficient propellant, especially compared to modern firearms and modern propellants. So you had these long barrels, and the idea was the more burn time you could get out of this slow burning propellant, the more performance you get out of the pistol.
Makes sense.
As people started going out into the West and you had the advent of smokeless powder, you could start, well, carrying this thing around, if I may, is going to be a bit of a chore. Now imagine you're a gunfighter in the Old West. You're in a world in which split seconds decide whether you live or die. Which one would you rather be chucking out of your holster? The long, wait, here it comes, I'm ready. Or do you want the slightly shorter barrel? So, while these things are popular, and they made sense in a military setting, you can see the various barrel lengths. And as black powder became replaced with smokeless powder, shorter barrel lengths, just for convenience sake, became more popular.
I noticed there's some differences in the hammer profiles. Would you mind touching on that for a second?
Sure thing. All of these have a good tall hammer profile, and the intention was you'd hank that thing back and you'd have plenty of leverage. Remember, the mainsprings of the time were heavy, heavy V-springs, and in order to make sure that the gun fired reliably, we talked about black powder as a propellant. Black powder as a propellant is very slow burning, very inefficient, and so it leaves an awful lot of residue. Imagine yourself, if you're out riding the range, you've got dust, you've got dirt, you've got all kinds of rain and things like that, getting in the action of the gun. So, in addition to that, the residue from the propellant, once it was fired, would gunk up your cylinder and gunk up your gun pretty badly. What's the loudest sound in a gunfight?
Click.
Click.
Yeah.
So what they would do is they would put this immensely strong mainspring in this thing so that no matter what happened, when you hanked that thing back, That hammer went forward with some real authority, and it would make sure that gun would fire. However, because it was so heavy, you wanted as much mechanical advantage as you could possibly get, and so you put these tall spur hammers on top of the firearm. As propellant became better and build quality became better, and those of us that are competitors became better, you start wanting a slightly lower profile. The lower profile enables you to get on top of the hammer a little bit easier because you're not hanking back a 23, 25, or 28 pound mainspring. 13, 15 pounds is all you need to make one of these things go off.
Now, you have a little bit of real world practical experience with that application, correct?
Absolutely.
What's your position right now in the championships?
Depending on which it is, I am a state, national, and world champion.
State, national, and world.
Yes.
So I think I could probably outdraw you with a crayon. So
Jeff is pulling out actually one of my favorites in terms of looks appeal.
The Drifter by Pieta.
the Drifter, like Lone Plains Drifter.
High Plains Drifter.
High
There you
Plains
go.
Drifter.
Now, one of the things you'll notice is this has an octagonal barrel. What does an octagonal barrel do? Well, straight up, it looks pretty cool, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And if you're interested in the Old West, or if you're going to become a cowboy action shooter, the chances are quite good that you'll have a rifle with, look at that, an octagonal barrel. So, look, I match. Fashion matters, boys and girls. It's better to look good than to shoot good in some cases. Anyway.
Rule number 4, look good doing it.
Anyway, so what this does is this emulates the look of your long arm. However, there's also another practical use to it, and that is the extra steel around the periphery makes this gun weigh a little tiny bit more. And when you are shooting at a high rate of speed, that extra bit of weight is going to dampen the recoil, and it's going to help the gun remain steady while you're working it. Remember, with single action weapons, you have to cock it every single time. So every time I'm hanking back on that hammer, that gun wants to move. The heavier the firearm is, the less motion there will be in response to me working it over. Okay, so because we have much smaller, much lighter springs now, because we're using mostly smokeless powder, you don't quite need that really big, tall hammer to get on top, which would involve, imagine trying to cock this with one hand. Hand up on top and pull that trigger. This is with the Ruger. That's an easy one. Modern firearms are good, they're strong, they're robust, as Jeff said, but don't be afraid to use them so much that you wear them out. Because guess what? There are people that know how to fix them, and there are parts available to fix them, and the more you use them, the better you're going to get.
So why do you have two guns?
Because in the sport of cowboy action shooting, it's actually a 4-gun sport, a 3-gun sport in terms of the type of weapon, but it's actually a 4-gun sport. You're going to have 2 handguns, and because remember we talked about you're only going to be loading 5 rounds in each cylinder, every pistol string is going to be a 10-shot string for 5 and 5.
So 5 and then 5.
5 and then 5.
And then you use a lever gun?
Then we use a lever action rifle and one of the 2 kinds of shotguns that's allowed. Very popular are things like coach guns. This is a short-barreled shotgun. Now, the short barrel tends to be a little more popular among cowboy action shooters for a couple of reasons. The distances at which we shoot are fairly modest, but importantly, we also work in and out of buildings, doorways, windows, and those sorts of things. So the less barrel length you have, the less chance there is that you'll be catching on something on your way through a door or something. So side-by-sides include both hammerless and hammered, and there are categories in which you have to use a hammered double. There are special categories. Knowing that you're going to be competing against people with the same, it's going to slow you down a little tiny bit.
Do you compete?
What about those archaic people that prefer the pump action shotgun?
Wouldn't that also be considered a trench gun?
The trench gun refers specifically to a gun that has the heat shield and the bayonet lug and things like that. Minus the bayonet, you can use that in wild butt shooting, which is an offshoot of cowboy action shooting in which they use a 1911. Again, another episode, and love to talk about that. You use a 1911 in lieu of 2 handguns. You use a 1911 in multiple magazines. That said, this is an 1897, which was a popular basis for the trench gun. There are a couple of reasons for that. The 1897, first of all, let's just pay homage to the fact that, remember we were talking about developmental arcs? This is an early shotgun, and you can see there are a lot of lessons learned by the making of this shotgun. Watch what happens when I pull the bolt back. You'll never see this in a modern gun. Okay, I've got the hammer goes back, the bolt goes back, the carrier goes down, the flag comes up. You got pieces going every which way, all poking into your face and that sort of thing. It's an early design, and they learned a lot from it. However, because this was designed originally in 1893, this is during the cowboy era, so this is still allowable in the cowboy action shooting world in most categories. It also has another feature, again, which made it very popular as a trench gun, and that is this is one of a very small group of firearms in which, watch the hammer as I hold the trigger back. This firearm can be slammed. Everybody nods approving. So if you are in a category or you're shooting wild bunch where you start with the gun stoked, you can really rock and roll with one of these things. And let's face it, that's just plain fun.
Develop good skill punching at the target, and you can shoot these very quickly.
It's a nice gun, Jeff.
Thank you.
If I wanted to get into something like cowboy shooting, I'm more modern guy, you know, I don't know much about these. How would you get started? Like if I was saying, hey, I want to come out and shoot with you guys, how would I find information on that?
First of all, I would encourage that. Now, you have the good fortune of you know some people, right? So we would be able to steer you right and knowledgeably. As always, I recommend anyone who's interested in doing this, go to a match. There are matches in every state of the union. You can go to sasnet.com and find their locator. They have a map which shows every single club when they shoot. We know that here in Southern California, we are most fortunate because there is a match literally every Saturday and Sunday of the month that you can reach within about an hour of right where we're standing right now. So, like I said, we're very fortunate. Some places might not be so fortunate, but there is a cowboy match in virtually every state in the union. Go there. Or talk to someone who is knowledgeable. Call American Gun Works, talk to Jeff, talk to myself. We'll be glad to steer you straight. Specifically in your particular case, I have a feeling that you will not be content with walking up, jingling spurs, cowboy hat, maybe a nice bandana, just looking good. You're going to want to shoot fast.
We were just talking about the lovely sport of cowboy single action shooting society, cowboy gun competitions, and I was asking how I find information. They gave me some websites. What was that website again?
Sassnet.com. That's SASSNET.com. You will find everything that you need there and where the drop downs. There's everything from a forum where you can discuss issues and post questions to a locator. Okay, before we go, I want to mention a couple of things. This is Jeff. He is the owner of American Gun Works. This is Jeremy. This is one of the guiding lights of American Gun Works, among other things. And I'm Mark Romano, Fredrick Jackson Turner in the cowboy world. If you haven't had a chance yet, please listen to our radio show. We've been on for almost 5 years on KRLA. We are in 4 major markets at this point in time, a show called the Gunslinger Network. Please look that up. Look up Gunslinger Auctions or the Gunslinger Network. Listen to our radio show, weekly show, 2 hours. You'll find us on Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube Live. And if you have a chance, look up my show on the History Channel, which is called The Ultimate Marksman.
All right, so on that, I'm going to wrap it up and say I think I'm all in. Give me that bad boy. I think 2 of these should work, and one of those 1873 rifles that have been tuned up, and one of them pump-action shotgun things.
Excellent.
I want to get into this. Let's try it. When's that next competition that you're going to be at?
The next major match is the California State Championships, and we will be there at the end of April, the 25th through the 28th at the Route 66 Sports Park in Cajon.
Are you going to be there?
I will be there.
We will all be there because you're going to have me out there helping with the booth, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
So we'll see you out there. I'm Jeremy with MS Videos, and we out.